Everett Caldwell was halfway down the marble staircase when the monitor on the wall flickered and stopped him cold. The playroom camera showed his twin daughters, Lila and Noemi, standing barefoot on the rug. They didn't speak. They never had. Everett's breath caught as the new maid, Althea Brooks, knelt in front of them. She wasn't cleaning. She wasn't talking. She was humming, soft and low, like a church sanctuary before sunrise. Her fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the floor. Everett stepped closer. His heart pounded. The girls were watching her hands. Lila's lips parted. Noemi's fingers moved, copying the beat. Everett's knees weakened. He had paid the best doctors in Boston, Chicago, and San Diego. They all said the same thing. Nothing. On the screen, Althea pressed her hand to her chest. The twins mirrored her. Then Lila made a sound. Not a word. Not even a voice. Just breath. Everett grabbed the railing. The cameras had been installed to catch danger. Instead, they were showing him hope. It terrified him. Because hope had failed him before, and he didn't know if his heart could survive believing again. He reached for the audio, hands shaking, eyes burning. Somewhere deep inside, a prayer he hadn't spoken in years tried to rise. He swallowed it. The screen blinked, and Althea smiled softly, like she knew someone was watching. Everett whispered, barely audible, "God, don't let this break me." Downstairs, the twins leaned closer to the woman humming. And for the first time, silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something holy was about to speak, whether he was ready or not. Everett stood frozen, realizing his fortune had never prepared him for this moment, when watching meant surrender, and love demanded patience, faith, and courage he didn't know he had. Everett Caldwell hadn't always believed in cameras. Once he believed in people. That faith collapsed the year Lila and Noemi turned 2. Specialists filled his calendar, each appointment ending with careful words and colder conclusions. Everett paid, smiled, nodded, then went home to the quiet. The cameras came later. After a nanny quit without notice. After a therapist suggested acceptance. After Everett realized money couldn't stand watch for him. He installed them everywhere except bathrooms, hallways, playrooms, the kitchen. Not because he distrusted the girls, but because he distrusted hope. Hope had a way of sneaking in, then leaving devastation behind. At night, Everett sat alone in his study, Atlanta's skyline glowing beyond the glass. He rewound footage, not searching for miracles, but for proof that nothing ever changed. Because if nothing changed, nothing could be taken away. That was the bargain he made with God, though he never said it out loud. Control felt safer than prayer. Until the camera showed him something he couldn't explain. And for the first time, Everett feared they weren't protecting his daughters from the world, but protecting him from believing again. He told himself this was temporary, that Althea Brooks would be like the others. Kind. Professional. Replaceable. But deep down, beneath the steel routines and locked expectations, something stirred. A memory of childhood hymns, of a God who still spoke when people couldn't. Everett pushed the thought away. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would confront her. Tonight he watched, and wondered what it would cost him if the silence truly ended. For Everett, the answer already felt close to everything he feared. He stared at the darkened screen, wondering how many times he'd confused silence with absence and control with love. Maybe you've done that too. Maybe there's something, or someone, in your life you've been watching closely, afraid to hope, afraid to let go. If you've ever stood at that edge, wondering whether to believe again or protect your heart one more time, you're not alone. Let us know in the comments, have you ever been afraid of hope? Morning in the penthouse always started the same way. Light slid through the tall windows. The city outside moved fast. Inside, everything moved slow. Lila and Noemi sat side by side at the breakfast island with their feet dangling, bowls untouched until someone remembered to warm the milk just right. They didn't complain. They didn't ask for anything. They simply watched. Everett watched too, pretending he wasn't. The twins had their own language, small things most people missed. A blink that meant no. A fingertip against the table that meant I'm here. When Lila got overwhelmed, she pressed her thumb into her palm until it turned white. When Noemi felt brave, she leaned forward like she wanted to step into the world, then pulled back at the last second. Therapists labeled it nonverbal coping. Everett called it heartbreak with manners. Their days were filled with specialists, flashcards, mirrors, breathing exercises. Every session ended with the same polite disappointment. The girls would cooperate, then return to quiet like a door that refused to open. Everett kept their schedule tight because empty time left space for questions. And questions led to hope. Yet in the middle of all that order, there were moments that didn't fit. Like last night, when Lila's lips parted like she wanted to let something out. Or the way Noemi had stared at Althea's humming like she was hearing music for the first time. Everett replayed the memory as he buttoned his cufflinks. He could still see it, the twins copying a rhythm like it belonged to them. He told himself it was coincidence. A cute trick, nothing more. But when he passed the playroom door and heard that low hum again, something inside him tightened. The twins weren't laughing. They weren't talking. They were leaning in. And Everett realized the most dangerous thing in his home wasn't silence. It was the possibility that his daughters had been waiting for the right kind of listening all along. Althea Brooks didn't enter the Caldwell home like someone trying to impress anyone. She arrived with one suitcase, a pressed uniform, and eyes that looked like they'd survived storms without needing to announce it. The staffing agency called her reliable. The house manager called her quiet. Everett called her temporary. But the twins reacted like they recognized something. The first day, Lila watched Althea from behind the couch, her fingers curled tight. Noemi stood in the doorway, still as a statue. Most new hires tried to win the girls over with bright voices and toys. Althea didn't. She simply nodded as if saying, I see you. Take your time. She moved through the penthouse with steady patience. No sudden gestures, no sharp sounds. When she cleaned, she did it like a prayer. Slow, careful, respectful. When she passed the twins, she didn't force eye contact. She didn't pity them either. That was what unsettled Everett the most. Pity had always filled this house like fog. Althea didn't bring fog. She brought something clear. On the second evening, Everett caught her in the kitchen, washing dishes that weren't hers to wash. A small gospel hymn slipped from her lips, barely louder than water running. When she noticed him, she stopped immediately. Sorry, sir, she said softly. It helps me stay grateful. Everett stared at her, searching for performance. People always performed around money. But Althea's calm didn't feel like acting. It felt like rootedness. Then she added, almost under her breath, God don't need volume to be present. Everett didn't respond. He just walked away. Yet later, watching the cameras, he saw Althea kneel on the playroom rug again, tapping that same rhythm. And this time the twins didn't shrink back. They inched closer. Everett's jaw tightened. Because he couldn't tell what Althea was bringing into his home, healing or heartbreak dressed up like hope. Everett tried not to watch the cameras the next day. He failed by noon. What he saw unsettled him more than the night before. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because the same small moments kept repeating. Althea knelt. The twins leaned in. A rhythm formed. Tap, pause, tap. It happened in the playroom. Later in the sunroom. Once even in the hallway while Althea folded towels. She never initiated contact. She waited. And somehow the girls always came to her. Everett rewound the footage again and again. The pattern didn't change. No toys. No commands. No pressure. Just space. Lila began sitting closer each time. Noemi started tapping back. Their faces, usually guarded, softened, like they weren't bracing for disappointment. Everett felt a strange anger rise. Patterns were dangerous. Patterns led to expectations. And expectations shattered. He called the house manager and asked if Althea had any training. None. No degree. No special certifications. Just housekeeping and years of private service work. That should have ended it. Instead, Everett found himself staying late in his office, watching live feeds instead of recordings. He noticed things he'd missed before. How Althea slowed her breathing when the girls tensed. How she stopped humming when they pulled away. She followed their lead. By evening, Everett realized the truth he didn't want to admit. This wasn't random. It was communication. The twins weren't becoming louder. They were becoming present. And for the first time, Everett wondered if the world had been trying to teach his daughters how to speak, when what they needed was someone willing to learn their language. That thought frightened him more than any diagnosis ever had, because it meant the failure might not have been theirs at all. And if that was true, Everett didn't know how to forgive himself. Everett expected faith to look loud if it showed up at all. The kind with raised hands, big declarations, and promises that demanded belief up front. Althea's faith didn't look like that. It barely looked like anything. She never preached. Never quoted scripture. Never told the twins what God could do for them. She simply showed up the same way every day, steady, gentle, unafraid of silence. Everett noticed it during small moments. Althea pausing before entering a room, like she was asking permission from the air itself. Her habit of touching the doorway lightly, whispering words he couldn't hear. Once, when a glass shattered in the kitchen, Althea didn't gasp. She closed her eyes and exhaled. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" Everett asked, sharper than he meant to. "For covering us," she replied calmly, already sweeping the floor. That answer stayed with him longer than it should have. That evening, Everett watched the playroom feed as Althea sat with the twins in total quiet. No humming. No tapping. Just stillness. Minutes passed. The girls didn't fidget. They didn't retreat. They stayed. Everett felt something tighten behind his ribs. He remembered his grandmother's living room in Savannah. The way she used to say God listened even when you didn't have words. He'd laughed at that once. Now, watching his daughters sit peacefully in silence, Everett felt something unfamiliar press against his skepticism. Not belief. Not yet. But curiosity. And curiosity, he realized, was the doorway hope always used to sneak back in. He closed the monitor and leaned back in his chair, palms open, unsure why. For the first time in years, Everett didn't feel the need to control the outcome. And that scared him almost as much as it comforted him. Everett waited until the house settled into its nighttime hush. The twins were asleep. The city lights blinked beyond the windows. He found Althea in the laundry room, folding towels with careful precision. "We need to talk," he said. She looked up, unstartled. "Yes, sir." Everett didn't sit. Standing felt safer. "I've been watching the cameras." "I know," Althea replied gently. That answer threw him. "Then you know why this concerns me. You're doing something with my daughters. Something unapproved." Althea placed the towel down. She didn't rush. "I'm not doing anything to them," she said. "I'm being with them." Everett felt heat rise in his chest. They've had professionals. Decades of experience. Degrees. You don't. "No, sir," she said. "I don't." "Then explain what I'm seeing." Althea met his eyes. There was no fear there. Only patience. "Your girls don't need fixing. They need safety. They need someone who won't rush their miracle. Miracle? Everett snapped. The word tasted bitter. Yes, she said calmly, because sometimes God works quiet. And when he does, people mistake him for nothing happening. Everett turned away. He buried prayers. Funeralized hope. He wasn't ready to exhume either. You're crossing a line, he said. I won't have my daughters hurt by expectation. Althea nodded. Then I'll be careful with your heart too. That stopped him. She picked up the towels again. If you want me gone, say it, she said softly. But please don't confuse patience for manipulation. Everett left without answering. Later, alone in his study, he replayed the footage again. Not to find wrongdoing, but to find proof that he was right to be afraid. He didn't find it. Instead, he saw his daughters lean toward someone who wasn't asking them to change. And for the first time, Everett wondered if confrontation had revealed more about him than about Althea. The next morning, Everett asked Althea to join him for coffee. The request surprised them both. I don't understand what you're doing, he admitted, staring into his cup. But I need to. Althea sat across from him, hands folded. Sir, your daughters are already talking. Everett scoffed before he could stop himself. They don't speak. They communicate, she corrected gently. Speech is just one language. Everett rubbed his temples. Doctors spent years trying to get them to talk. That's because everyone keeps trying to lead them, Althea said. But children like Lila and Noemi need to be followed. She explained the rhythm. The pauses. The way the twins responded when given control. They listen with their whole bodies, she said. And when they trust you, they answer. Everett looked up. Answer how? Althea smiled softly. You've seen it. You just don't recognize it yet. He thought of Lila's breath. Noemi's tapping fingers. The stillness that felt full instead of empty. My grandmother used to say, Althea continued, that God hears the prayers we don't have words for. Some folks shout. Some folks sit quiet. Both get heard. Everett swallowed hard. He hadn't prayed in years, but something in her words felt like an invitation that didn't demand belief up front. And if they never speak? He asked quietly. Althea didn't rush the answer. Then you still have daughters who trust you, who feel safe. That's not failure. Everett leaned back, chest tight. For the first time, the question wasn't will my daughters ever talk? It was have I been listening the wrong way all along? Everett didn't plan to ask about Althea's past. The question slipped out while they stood in the hallway, watching the twins stack blocks in careful silence. You learned this somewhere, he said. This patience. Althea's hands stilled. For a moment, Everett thought he'd crossed a line. Then she nodded once. Baton Rouge, she said. They sat in the breakfast nook as rain tapped against the windows. Althea spoke without drama, like someone telling the truth because it no longer hurt the way it used to. My son Malachi never spoke, she said. Not a word. Folks called him delayed. Broken. A test. Everett flinched. I called him mine, she continued. He talked with his hands. With the way he leaned into me when the world got loud. With how he hummed against my shoulder when he felt safe. She smiled faintly. Church people prayed over him. Strangers promised miracles. I learned early that love doesn't rush God. Malachi died at 9. An illness that came fast and left nothing to bargain with. Althea didn't cry as she said it. She'd done that part already years ago. Before he passed, she said softly, he taught me something. Silence isn't empty. It's full of things most people are too impatient to hear. Everett stared at the table. The room felt heavier, sacred somehow. That's why I don't push your girls, Althea added. I listen. I wait. If God wants sound, it'll come. If not, peace will. Everett swallowed. For years he'd treated silence like an enemy. Now he wondered if it had been a language all along, one he'd never bothered to learn. When they returned to the playroom, Lila reached for Althea's sleeve. Noemi followed, resting her head briefly against her arm. Everett watched, chest tight. This wasn't training. It was inheritance. After Baton Rouge, Everett stopped watching the cameras like evidence. He watched them like witnesses. He noticed how the twins' shoulders relaxed when Althea entered a room. How Lila no longer pressed her thumb into her palm when overwhelmed. How Noemi lingered instead of retreating. None of it showed up on charts. No reports. No medical language for what was happening. But Everett saw it clearly. The girls were lighter. One afternoon, Everett stayed home from a meeting and sat quietly in the playroom corner. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He simply mirrored what Althea did, waited. Lila glanced at him, held his gaze, then tapped the floor twice. Everett's throat closed. Althea caught his eye and nodded once like she was saying, "Answer her." Everett tapped back. Awkward. Unsure. Lila smiled. It wasn't big. It wasn't loud. But it was real. That night, Everett rewatched the footage again. Not because he needed reassurance, but because he didn't want to forget how small miracles looked when they arrived quietly. For the first time, he understood something painful and freeing. The cameras hadn't failed. They'd just been pointed at the wrong problem. Everett had been trying to protect his daughters from harm, when what they really needed protection from was being misunderstood. He shut down the monitors and sat in the dark, hands clasped, not sure when he'd started praying again, or if this was simply listening. Either way, for the first time in years, Everett felt close to God without asking for anything at all. The specialist arrived on a Thursday morning with a leather briefcase and a practiced smile. Everett had scheduled the visit weeks ago, back when he still believed answers came from credentials. Dr. Halvorsen watched the twins through polite distance. She spoke in measured tones, asked routine questions. Not once did she sit on the floor. Lila tapped the rug softly. Noemi leaned toward Althea. The doctor cleared her throat. "I don't see measurable progress," she said. "Comfort, yes. Attachment. But speech requires structured intervention." Everett felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Relief and disappointment tangled together. Althea remained quiet. Dr. Halvorsen continued, "What you're observing is emotional dependency. It can be misleading." That word, misleading, hung heavy in the room. Everett glanced at his daughters. They had gone still. The rhythm was gone. The air felt thinner. "We'll continue therapy," he said automatically. "As planned." Althea's shoulders stiffened just slightly. She nodded once. After the specialist left, the house felt colder. Everett watched the cameras later that evening and saw the difference immediately. The twins didn't approach Althea. They didn't lean in. They watched from a distance, guarded again. Everett felt something crack. He realized then that intrusion didn't always come with malice. Sometimes it came wrapped in professionalism. That night, Everett stood outside the playroom door, listening to silence that felt heavier than before. He understood too late that safety wasn't just about protection. It was about trust. And trust, once shaken, didn't respond to credentials. Everett closed his eyes, realizing the world had entered his home again, uninvited, and it had cost his daughters something precious he wasn't sure how to restore. Everett couldn't sleep. The house was quiet in a way that pressed against his ears. He went to the study and pulled up the footage from earlier that evening. He watched it once, then again. There was a moment, just seconds long, when Althea knelt beside Lila. No tapping. No humming, just closeness. Lila leaned forward, lips brushing Althea's ear. Everett froze the frame. He rewound, slowed it down, turned the volume up until static filled the room. Nothing. No sound registered. No waveform. No proof. But Everett had seen her mouth move. He was sure of it. His heart pounded. He leaned back, hands trembling. Had he imagined it? Was desperation finally playing tricks on him? He replayed the moment again, softer this time, as if force might scare it away. Althea's eyes had closed. Her expression wasn't surprise. It was recognition. Everett whispered, "What did you say?" to an empty room. The footage offered no answers. Just silence. And yet, something inside him knew the moment mattered. Not because it proved anything, but because it felt intentional. Everett shut the monitor off. He sat in the dark, replaying the image in his mind instead. For years he had begged God for sound. Now he wondered if God had answered in a way that refused to be recorded. Because some moments, Everett realized, weren't meant to be captured. They were meant to be believed, or lost forever. Hope didn't arrive in Everett's chest like relief. It arrived like fear. He felt it the next morning while watching Lila and Noemi eat in silence, their movements careful again, guarded. The rhythm hadn't returned. The closeness had thinned. And yet Everett couldn't unsee what he'd seen the night before. A mouth moving. A moment meant for someone else. Hope whispered, "Something is changing." Fear answered, "And it can be taken away." Everett had lived long enough to know that loss always followed belief. His fortune had been built on anticipation and control, but his heart had learned the opposite lesson. Never lean too hard into what you couldn't guarantee. He kept his distance all day. Let meetings fill the hours. Let noise replace thought. But every pause brought him back to the same question. What if he'd interrupted something sacred? He remembered every promise made by specialists. Every almost. Every polite explanation of limitations. He'd learned to survive by lowering expectation until disappointment had nowhere to land. Now Althea's presence threatened that balance. That night, Everett stood outside the twins' bedroom and listened to their breathing through the door. He felt foolish, vulnerable, like a man waiting on something he couldn't name. He pressed his palm against the wood and whispered, "Please?" He wasn't sure who he was speaking to. God. Himself. The silence. Hope didn't answer. But it didn't leave either. And Everett realized fear of hope was still hope, just wearing armor. Everett found Althea packing her suitcase the following afternoon. "I didn't mean for this," she said quietly, folding her uniform. "The girls pulled back after yesterday. That tells me I've become a distraction." Everett's chest tightened. "You're not." She met his eyes. "Sir, when trust gets interrupted, children protect themselves. I don't want to be the reason they close again." "You're the reason they opened," Everett said, sharper than he intended. Althea paused. Her hands stilled. "That opening isn't mine to claim." Everett struggled for words. He wasn't used to asking people to stay. People stayed for pay or left without explanation. This felt different. "I'm asking you," he said finally. "Not as my employee. As their father." Althea searched his face. "Then you need to choose what you believe in," she said. "Because I can't work around fear." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Honest. Everett exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to believe without controlling the outcome." Althea nodded. "Then start by not stopping it." From the hallway came a small sound. Not a voice. Not a word. A shuffle. They turned together. Lila stood there, fingers curled in her sleeve. Noemi just behind her, eyes fixed on Althea's suitcase. Althea knelt instinctively. She didn't reach out. She waited. The twins took a step forward. Everett's breath caught. Althea looked back at him once. "This," she said softly, "is why I stay." If you'll let me. Everett nodded, unable to speak. And for the first time he chose not to interfere with whatever God was doing in the quiet. The power went out just after midnight. At first, Everett thought it was a system glitch. He checked his phone. No signal. The city beyond the windows went dark, Atlanta's glow replaced by an unfamiliar hush. For the first time since installing them, the cameras were useless. Everett stood in the hallway, heart racing, unsure why panic rose so fast. He told himself the twins were safe. Althea was there. Nothing had changed. But everything had. He walked to the playroom by instinct. The door was open. Moonlight spilled across the rug. Althea sat cross-legged on the floor. Lila and Noemi were with her, pressed close, not afraid. Everett hesitated. No screens. No replay. No proof. Just presence. Althea didn't look up. She knew he was there. "You can sit," she said softly. He did. Awkwardly. The floor felt colder than he expected. No humming tonight. No rhythm. Just breath. Everett focused on matching the girl's slow inhales the way Althea did. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Then Noemi shifted closer to him. She rested her head briefly against his arm. Everett froze, then relaxed. He didn't move. He didn't react. He stayed. Lila leaned forward. Her lips trembled. Everett's heart pounded so loudly he feared it would scare the moment away. Nothing came. And somehow that was okay. The power returned with a soft click. Lights flickered on. Everett didn't move. He didn't reach for the cameras. He realized then that watching had been his shield. This sitting in the dark, unguarded, was faith. And for the first time, Everett understood that miracles didn't need witnesses. They needed patience. The sound came the next afternoon. Not during therapy. Not in front of cameras or specialists. It came while Althea was folding laundry and Everett sat at the table pretending to read. Lila stood near the window, sunlight catching her face. Noemi tapped the glass once. Then Lila inhaled. The sound that followed wasn't a word. It wasn't even close. It was breath shaped into intention. A soft, trembling release that carried effort, not meaning. Everett's book slipped from his hands. Noemi turned sharply. Her eyes widened. She smiled, wide and unrestrained, and made a sound of her own, higher, breathier. Althea didn't move. She closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. She whispered, "Thank you," like it was enough. Everett couldn't breathe. He wanted to celebrate, to shout, to call every doctor who had ever said never. But something in him understood the fragility of the moment. He stayed still. Lila looked at him. Really looked at him. She made the sound again. Everett pressed his hand to his mouth. His knees buckled. He sat down hard, laughing and crying without knowing which came first. It wasn't speech, but it was courage. It was a door cracking open. And Everett understood something profound. Sound wasn't the miracle. Trust was. The girls didn't need to speak to prove they were whole. They needed safety to try. And in that quiet room, with sunlight and folded laundry and God present without announcement, Everett realized his daughters had given him something far greater than words. They had given him permission to believe again. Everett didn't know how to pray the way Althea did. There were no verses ready on his tongue, no practiced posture. Prayer for him had always sounded like bargaining. But that night, alone in his study, he sat with his hands open and said nothing. The house was quiet. Not the tense quiet he used to fear, but a gentle one, like a held breath. He thought of Lila's effort. Noemi's smile. The way Althea had whispered gratitude without asking for more. Everett realized he had spent years demanding outcomes from God. Proof. Guarantees. Timelines. And when none came, he walked away. Now he felt foolish and small and strangely at peace. "I don't know how to do this," he said aloud. His voice cracked. "But if you're here, don't rush me." The words surprised him. He wasn't asking for sound, or healing, or answers. He was asking for patience. Memories surfaced, his grandmother's hands folded in Savannah, her voice humming low while the world felt heavy. She used to say faith wasn't about volume but about staying. Everett wiped his face. "I'll stay," he whispered. Down the hall the twins slept. Not cured, not transformed, just safe. And somehow that felt holy. Everett understood then that prayer wasn't about changing God's mind. It was about letting God change how tightly you held fear. For the first time he didn't feel like a billionaire begging heaven. He felt like a father learning to listen. And that, Everett realized, might be the only prayer he'd ever needed to know. Weeks later, Everett stood in the control room and stared at the monitors. Nothing dramatic played across the screens. Just ordinary moments. Lila arranging books by color. Noemi tapping a rhythm on the window. Althea humming softly while dusting a shelf. Everett reached for the console, then stopped. He powered the system down. The cameras had served their purpose. They had protected, recorded, documented. But they had also kept him at a distance, watching life instead of living it. Everett didn't need witnesses anymore. He needed presence. The twins had changed, not in ways doctors could measure, but in ways that mattered. They sought connection. They tried. They trusted. And Everett met them there, not as an observer, but as a participant. One evening, Lila pressed her palm to her chest and looked at him. Everett mirrored the gesture. She smiled. That was their language now. Althea never claimed credit. She simply stayed, faithful to quiet work and patient love. Sometimes she sang hymns under her breath. Sometimes she didn't. God, she said once, knew when to be loud and when to be still. Everett believed her now. On a Sunday afternoon, sunlight filled the living room as the twins sat between him and Althea on the floor. No words were spoken. None were needed. Everett felt something settle inside him, an understanding that miracles didn't always arrive as answers. Sometimes they arrived as clarity. The cameras had been installed to catch what might go wrong. Instead, they showed him what went right when fear stepped aside. Everett looked at his daughters and felt gratitude rise, deep and unforced. They might speak one day. They might not. Either way, Everett knew the truth. Silence had never been the absence of God in his home. It had been the place where God waited patiently, until someone was finally ready to listen. Some stories don't end with loud answers. They end with understanding. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of someone you love, or a season where silence taught you something words never could, please take a moment to let us know. Tap the like button so this story can reach someone else who might need it. Subscribe if you want more stories about quiet faith, unexpected healing, and the moments that change us when no one is watching. And leave a comment. What part of this story stayed with you the longest? We read every one.